on the flip side of that coin, there was also the story that if I can't do it, I am worthless. What else am I? I'm not worth loving. And it took me being around a new community group to recognize that the ways in which I was denying myself love was also denying other people love and causing the pain that I actually was hoping to avoid causing in the first place.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to Trauma, Training and Transformation, the podcast where we explore movement heals the mind. Today's episode is about what happens when survival is no longer enough. Many people learn how to endure difficult experiences. They keep functioning, keep moving and finding ways to cope. But personal transformation asks something deeper of us. It asks whether we can take what we have lived through, learn from it, and use it to create something meaningful beyond ourselves. Today's special guest is Summer Holeman, and together we will explore how personal transformation can become outward impact, shaping our identity, relationships, leadership, purpose, and the way we contribute to the lives of others. Summer, thank you very much for agreeing to join us today. Could you please give a bit of an introduction to the audience today?
Absolutely. So my name is Summer Holeman. I guess fun fact, my nickname since high school has been Summer Swoleman, which I find just hilarious now, but it has a lot to do with my work, so it's very handy. And I am the participation manager for British Functional Fitness, and I'm currently doing my PhD in health and social sciences at the University of Edinburgh.
That's awesome. And every credit to you with all the work that you put in, and I get the sense that you're hungry to get it finished so you can continue contributing to the wider research world. Every transformation has a beginning, although we do not always recognize it at the time. So when you look back at your own journey, what was the moment when you realized that you could no longer simply survive and that something within you, in your own life, needed to change?
That question I actually found really exciting. All of the research that I do and everything that I work on under the British Functional Fitness has to do with the transformation that I experienced as an exchange student at the University of Chester just over 3 years ago now, back in 2023. And at the time, I had a lot of adventures. I was working in behavioral ecology, studying tropical birds down in the rainforests of Panama, and was doing this exchange program as just a fun little add-on to the adventures while I was doing my undergraduate degree in biology. And Chester, funnily enough, was the last place that I thought I would enjoy going. I didn't know anything about England. I grew up in the most rural part of the United States, out in Cody, Wyoming. And to me, I just thought of the UK as one massive city. I was kind of like, what am I going to do out there? But at the time, I had been playing rugby for the University of Wyoming and briefly tried CrossFit in Laramie. So as soon as I arrived in Chester, I dropped into CrossFit Chester and instantly fell in love. The community opened its arms to me, and that contributed to a lot of changes in the way that I felt being around people, and how special and meaningful that I could find a place, because I think that I had grown up very disconnected from the world around me and from the people around me, with a lot of past emotional trauma and a lot of grief that I'd experienced as a kid. And the kindness that I experienced at CrossFit Chester and just the bond that I had at the University of Chester with these people at the CrossFit gym, it changed the way that I defined health for myself. I'd previously been a personal trainer. I became obsessed with nutrition and fitness as a teenager and used it as a way to control myself, thinking that if I was as healthy as I could possibly be, I could prevent any harm that I might bring to other people. Because I think that's something that I really identified as back then. I was always convinced that there was something inherently malicious in me. There was something harmful that if I didn't control myself, if I didn't do everything that I possibly could, if I wasn't as mature as I could possibly be, I would just cause a lot of pain in other people's lives. And I was always actually very self-reliant as well. And coming over to the UK, having absolutely no idea how this country worked and having no car to get myself around, and all of the car rides that the people at CrossFit Chester gave me and the tips that they gave me, like little reminders about time changes that were different in this country, or helping me find things around the country, or taking me out to the mountains, taking me to the beach. It forced me to drop that self-reliance. And for once, I couldn't take care of myself. I didn't know what I was doing. And I left Chester with a different understanding of what home and family can mean to a person.
That's incredible, because you made the big decision to come to the UK through your academic journey. And the bravery it took for you to make that decision is incredible, because not everyone has that self-confidence, belief in what they're doing is as a pathway forward to future endeavours. But you took that gamble, and thankfully it's paid off for you. And I'm sure based on your own work ethic and your infectious personality you have within CrossFit allows those relationships to grow and bond. But if you look back at the beginning of this journey, what did survival mode really look like for you during that early periods of that transition from the US to the UK?
Survival mode to me always felt like thinking 10 steps ahead, telling myself I should know things that I realistically couldn't know. And I'm still really young and I catch myself doing it all the time, especially after moving up here to Scotland. It's just hilarious how I show up in a country having never experienced these systems, or at least having experienced very little of them, and somehow thinking that I should have had everything together. And in a way, I guess it always meant being perfect. It always meant being responsible and being on top of it. And there was this sense that like, if I couldn't take care of myself, then I didn't deserve it, which comes with a lot of pressure.
If you look back, you've taken that pressure and used it as fuel to be able to overcome a lot of these challenges. Yeah. And when you reflect on your journey, when did you finally realize change was possible? And when did you recognize that?
Yeah. I recognized change was possible through the community that I was around. And this is a lot of what my research at the University of Edinburgh actually has to do with. So I study charities that use community-based functional fitness or a CrossFit approach in order to help support people who face really complicated barriers to healthy living. So these projects work with prison inmates down in Lancaster, or substance abuse rehabilitation, or chronic disease management and cancer treatment, and helping support and develop teenage girls that come from harsh households. And what I saw exploring all of these charities, because what happened was after the experiences that I had in Chester, I took a gamble and I went back to Chester a year later on the exact same exchange program, which is kind of weird and kind of crazy, right? And I used Chester as a home base to further explore the ways that community had impacted me and really try to understand for myself what being that group of people, how they had impacted me the way that they did. And what I saw with myself and what I saw with the people in the charities that I explored while I was bouncing around the country at the time is the community and the cultural environment provided by this approach, this like using CrossFit or community-based functional fitness, which is my term for kind of the methodology. It shows people that life can be different for them, like that it is possible. Yeah.
We often hear people talk about healing and transformation and using different forms and mechanisms to achieve that. This project that you are going through at the moment, using community-based functional movements, fitness, so many different terminologies are attached to that, but that's because of this, there's so much to unpack, and you're trying to utilize one element or complex elements to support people in their own healing journey. But we hear less about what comes before it. The fear, the beliefs, internal stories. And this reason why we've met, talking about our individual stories and how we become better people based on our own exposure to stimuli that challenges our behaviors to either heal or go backwards. So before your own personal transformation began, what beliefs or stories about yourself were keeping you stuck?
Yeah. It's funny to look back because actually this past year has made me reface a lot of the changes that I had in Chester and the new experiences that I was undergoing while being surrounded by this tight-knit community. Before I joined CrossFit and before I had these experiences, there was always this sense, as I mentioned previously, that there was something inherently evil or malicious about me. I grew up in a very religious household and with a mother that didn't treat me in the kindest way sometimes. I always held a lot of responsibility for any of the pain and the struggle that my parents had or any of the issues that my family had. Feeling like if I had just been more responsible, if I had been mature, if I had made better decisions, then the people around me didn't have to suffer. And that came with a big story of worthlessness to my character, to who I was as a person. And it was interesting because the self-reliance that came with that has become a massive facet of who I am and the things that I've been able to accomplish, because for some reason my whole life there was just this belief that it didn't matter what it was, I could do it. If somebody else could do it, I could go do that thing. Like it came with a lot of adventures. I saw people that were rafting rivers and I said, I'll go be a guide. I'll go be a river rafting guide. Rodeo was a big thing in my hometown and I was like, you know what, I can ride a bull and I could go raft the Grand Canyon and I can go to the rainforest. And on the flip side of that coin, there was also this story that if I can't do it, I am worthless. What else am I? I'm not worth loving. And it took me being around a new community group to recognize that the ways in which I was denying myself love was also denying other people love and causing the pain that I actually was hoping to avoid causing in the first place. And so after I left Chester the first time, actually, I explored psychotherapy. I used a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy and I saw a woman in Laramie, Wyoming who helped me kind of reshape that. It was so strange because I didn't even understand the concept of self-worth. I walked into therapy with this story of I am here because I recognize that if I don't do this, I will hurt other people. And there was something in me my whole life that I can recognize now where I wanted to treat other people well. And so it took a lot of shedding that sense of worthlessness and believing that I was of value to other people in order to keep moving forward and contribute the way that I feel I can now.
I really appreciate you sharing that. And it's quite emotional, it's quite raw, and I'm sure people listening to this podcast will resonate with a lot of things that you said today. But I want to just reassure you, you're an amazing individual. The amount of power and energy I get through the screen just in this communication is infectious, and I'm sure you can achieve anything you want and have the love of your life through whatever you achieve. So thank you for sharing that with us today. And I hope you the very best in whatever or whenever you choose to do the next task in your life. You do it with love, passion, and energy. You touched a little bit there about your relationship with your family, and too, coming from a religious background, it can have both positive and negative influences on what you decide. I chose to join the military at 16. I have some good and bad experiences with that, and that's for a different time. But your experiences often shape your decisions and influences what you did. You still feel that those expectations are placed upon yourself, that you self-drive because of your past exposures?
I think there is a level of projection from, and I guess this applies to anybody, and the environment that you grew up in as a kid does seem to shape the way that you view the world. And it's hilarious how I can go between countries and still take that culturally embedded kind of frame of mind, the way that I view the world, and project it onto the world around me. Because that's something that I actually find quite exciting about being in the UK, is a lot of the culture resonates with things and ideas that I've had as a person, but I didn't feel confident and able to share where I grew up in Wyoming. Some of which being this sense and like taking slowness. That was a big thing in Chester for me, was seeing people sitting on benches and reading a book in the middle of the day was mind blowing. Just being like, wow, they can just be in the present moment. And this sense of collective good that I feel being in the UK. And I really enjoy that. People like to pay attention to other people and make sure that we're all kind of functioning okay. And that might be a facet of the fact that there's such a higher density population out here. But even then, growing up in the church that I grew up in, I will walk around and there will be themes around like modesty and clothing, and that I will project onto other people. Or even without the religious environment, ways that I grew up around my relationship to food as a kid. Something that was a little bit heartbreaking for me when I first started working with these charities was I went to the Teenage Girl Holiday Club charity, the director of which has become one of the most impactful friends I've had in my life. But it's funny because I would like dish out food for these girls during their lunch period, and I could find myself projecting onto them and being like, oh, you're coming back for seconds and thirds. Like there was this level of shame with food. And it's, that has been one of the ways that I think therapy has helped a lot. Was I've always tried really hard to be self-aware, but having that kind of space to really work through it makes me self-aware of the ways in which I treat myself and not just the way that I treat others as well.
Do you think our greatest limitations usually come from external circumstances, or like what you've just touched on, narratives from our past, something that we recreate to help spur ourselves on or keep us grounded or challenged in a way? Which one do you think is the most influenced or limited on ourselves?
I almost view it as like a complex system. And maybe that's the way that I approach my research as well. I talk a lot about like systems-based thinking and the way that the group of people around you in your environment interact with your internalized self-beliefs and result in certain behaviors. And I think there's something case by case. If I was to talk about myself, I grew up in a very privileged environment, right? I mean, even though I struggled with my family dynamic and the way that my parents treated me, I had food on the table. I grew up in a middle-class white family in Wyoming, one of the safest places in the United States. And I had a very good school system. And even though I couldn't recognize it as a kid because of the ways that I had experienced the world before, I had so many people that loved me around me, and like the teachers that I grew up with that really invest. Part of the reason I asked the question that I did to get into this research and went to Chester again and explored these charities. And that question was, if CrossFit could help me so much, if it could change my life so much, how can it be so impactful for the people that face more complicated barriers? And I think for people that grew up in a less privileged environment, the way that interacts with their internalized self-beliefs, it is just magnifying in the direction they probably don't want to go. And so I think there was a lot to where my experiences had a lot to do with the way that I treated myself once I got out of the household that I grew up in. And that's why therapy was so impactful. And ever since, I have been able to apply the features of my like my personality that I used to punish myself with and use it in a more loving way. It's been amazing the way that life has changed for me. It blows my mind constantly to feel that I am so surrounded by love and just feel the sense of joy from being in the place that I have worked so hard to get to, and around the people that I can be myself around and put all that love into. Whereas I think there's a lot of people that their internal world and their external world are kind of colliding into something that might be more harmful.
I think one of the common themes a lot of the guests on this podcast talk about is personality and identity, be it the environment helps create identity, or it's how we project our identity into the environment that we're in. Difficult experience can also change how we see ourselves, but transformation can also require us to release identity that once protected us. And you mentioned that a little bit about your growth, and recognizing that growth within yourself is unique, because sometimes it's often blinkered and we don't want to acknowledge that really. So how did your identity change throughout your own journey?
My identity. It's interesting because I think it's been a process of letting go of the things that were not helpful and learning that things that I was ashamed of in the past are actually incredibly helpful. It's just rewriting narratives has been the biggest theme in my life, because I think part of the reason that I struggled as a kid was it felt like my perception of reality was never real. That the ways in which that I felt or reacted to the ways that people treated me were not valid. It was a constant struggle of, I feel angry and upset, but then I'm told that situation, that never happened. That was never real, right? How could you be angry and upset about something that was never real? And I had this massive identity of, I am just wrong. Like, I need to be open-minded and talk myself out of the ways that I feel and try to see it from other people's perspectives. So that was a narrative that I had to rewrite. I had to let go of this idea that I couldn't trust myself, while at the same time holding on to the idea that, yeah, I am also wrong sometimes, and that's okay. And I think the biggest thing was just working through shame. By letting go of the things that I was ashamed of, I could embody the things that were naturally there in my system and also not use it to punish myself anymore. A big thing that I also had to rewrite a narrative around was this desire for love that I always had. I used to have a lot of shame about that. I would never want to admit that I wanted somebody in my life, because as much as I wanted love, I was also so afraid of it, that feeling like if somebody loved me and was caring about me, that they were going to manipulate me and treat me poorly. And I had to rewrite this narrative and let go of the identity of I'm a bad person or there's something wrong with me for wanting that so badly, and acknowledge at the same time that was completely natural and that it actually is one of the better parts of my character now. It's served me as a CrossFit coach in the ways that I approach new members, or the ways that I celebrate our current members on their birthdays or during workouts. And it's helped me as a researcher as well. It's maintained this human side to what I do.
Transformation is quite unique. You know, you're trying to rediscover yourself to the person you want to be, but you're constantly reminded of the person that you used to be based on your upbringing, lifestyle, and your view on certain situations. You mentioned about shame and love. How do they match? Because they're obviously colliding all the time with your belief system. You believe in one, but want the other. Can you touch on how that can influence other people and how you can overcome that?
Yeah, it's funny. We're touching on a lot of things that I think about constantly because it always seems to be this bi-directional dynamic of the ways in which I treat myself become the ways in which I treat the people around me, which is why I think I was so conscious of the way that I treated myself in the first place and why health seemed to make a big difference in my own life. And I think the ways in which we shame ourselves tend to be the ways in which we shame or reject other people as well. I think in my own life, shame was used as a tool to try to keep myself perfect. You know, what I mentioned in the past is like I had to be as mature and responsible and as perfect as possible, as healthy as possible in order to do good for other people. And it was so interesting because I found the more that I shamed myself to try to eat well, the more I wanted to not do it. And I resented myself and the more stuck that I would feel. And then I became a coach and I had to realize that by helping other people, you know, witnessing the ways in which people shame themselves and having to sit with this responsibility of I can't contribute to the ways in which people are punishing themselves. It's not useful. It's not helping them. It's actually harming them a lot. It's not supportive of their health, even if they're shaming themselves into trying to do something well. And instead, kind of having this other tool discovered through the community around me was actually when I love myself and I do something for the love of it. When I do CrossFit, because I love doing CrossFit and I love learning and I love the feeling at the end of a hard workout, I am able to stay engaged and share that with other people around me. There's this idea in sociology that I've been reading about a lot, where it's this idea of collective effervescence, the emotional experience that you have in a group of people in a very emotionally intense environment. And it really resonates with me because of how bonding a high intensity workout can feel. And when it's done out of love and the energy that you bring into the room as a coach or as a member is to do it for the love of yourself and for the love of the people around you. I think that is incredibly transformational.
And CrossFit is just that. It's transformational just in one workout. For people who may not be familiar with functional fitness or CrossFit, it's so dynamic that you go in thinking one thing and you get shot out the other end completely revitalized, but also thinking, what did I just do for 45 minutes or so? Completely amazing. But it's that environment that gets people to come back alongside the amazing community that CrossFit provides. Many people who suffer with mental health, and it could be associated to body image, it could be reliving trauma that they've experienced, constantly keep the pain in their life because it's what's familiar. It's the fear of leaving. Let me say that. The fear of losing that can often be as problematic as the initial trauma dealing with. And that could also be associated to identity. So do you think people who can have their old identity still, because they keep it because it's safe and it feels familiar, instead of moving on and reshaping like you've been talking about yourself?
I feel like it is because it's one of those things that it's a comfort, even if that identity is painful, even like my old identity of I am worthless as a human being, because it was so me, it felt less painful initially. You know, I could numb out the ways because I was used to it. I could numb out the ways in which it was causing me harm in my life. And I think having an understanding of what contributed to that identity in the first place was really helpful for me as an individual. One of the most impactful things that my therapist said when I first started was, I don't remember what story I was telling, but I was just trying to talk myself out of the way that I felt again. And I was like, oh, it doesn't make sense why I feel this way. They obviously had good intentions, that kind of thing. And my therapist looks at me and she's like, that makes sense. Yeah, of course you would feel that way. And it just blew my mind, right? And having this acceptance of the way in which that identity has supported yourself and the tool that it has been to you up until that point can be really helpful. But I always wonder that if people are asking this question in the first place about their identity, they can point to the ways in which their identity is also harming them. And I always wonder if they're just numbing that pain out, right, in order to stay with what's familiar. Yeah. So looking at the ways in which your identity is both helpful and harmful, I think gives you more of a realistic picture in order to make a decision about moving forward. I think if you're trying to force yourself to change your identity, again, that's just another form of shame, unless you can accept why you have this identity in the first place and realistically look at it and say, this identity isn't helpful for me anymore. The ways that I saw it in myself was, I was in this really exciting new world as a coach and traveling between the UK and the US, trying to make all of this possible. And I could recognize the ways in which that I thought that I was worthless was holding me back. And with a better understanding of the circumstances that I grew up in, I could say, oh, it makes sense why you've reacted the way that you did. That was helpful to help you survive back then. But I can see something that I want right now. I can see the life that I want to have back over in Scotland. And I can see the type of work that I want to do and how much I care about it. And if my inability to understand my self-worth, like my disconnection from the ways in which I might be beneficial to other people, if that's holding me back from having the life that I want, then it is time to let go.
Transformation is rarely comfortable, and you describe it quite perfectly in your own journey. Many people listening may be currently facing their own uncertainty, be it grief, trauma, or significant lifestyle changes that have become often difficult to accept or live with. They may recognize that they may need to move forward from where they currently are, but the discomfort of doing so feels overwhelming. What did embracing discomfort in your own life teach you that comfort never could?
Yeah, it taught me that life could be different. Yeah, going back to it was the same thought that I had with the charities that I worked with, especially when I was in the prison. I was working out with these men, some of which were my age. At the time, when was this? I would have been 20 years old when I walked into that prison for the first time. And I did a partner workout with the guys at the 180 Project in Lancaster. And it was incredible to see the ways in which the community and the culture that was provided through this CrossFit gym and the leadership of the director, Lindsay Middleton, and her coaches at the 180 showed these guys that life could be different. I can make different decisions. And I actually think that I'm worthwhile and I'm capable enough to do it. And leaning into the discomfort, the new things, the ways in which I was challenging myself to try to accept love and believe that I was worthwhile to the people around me, it was terrifying. And I needed my hand held, like when I was going through therapy. And what was so great about it though, was I could sit there with the discomfort and I could look at it and ask myself, in what ways is this useful? Like, in what ways are the circumstances that I'm in right now? How can they be alchemized into change? A lot of it has to do with introspection, at least for me, asking myself the right questions.
Do you think sometimes we often romanticize struggle and overlook the importance of personal safety, support, and recovery?
I think there can be ways in which, for sure, that we do that. And I know that I did. I think in the past, I definitely still do this with work sometimes, where I feel like it has to be painful. It has to be day in, day out, 9 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours a day. It might come from different places for other people, depending on what you struggle with. But I definitely felt like mine was a sense of self-worth. Again, always coming back to that. I used work as a way to feel valuable to other people and to justify my existence. And romanticizing struggle, I think, almost is a distraction from the ways in which you can lean into the discomfort that you actually need to face instead. Yeah, it might be a distraction from something else in your life that is more uncomfortable that you just don't want to look at.
I completely agree. And I go back to holding on to the fear and the pain of despair, self-judgment, criticism, grief, shame, all those things. Often we hold on to because it's what we feel comfort in, because you know that's going to be there tomorrow. But on your own journey, when did you realize your own transformation was having a positive influence on people around you?
That's been one of the joys of being a coach, and why I continue coaching while I do other work, is because I can recognize the ways in which my influence can be helpful and change the way that people think about themselves. I think especially in environments like what you see in CrossFit, because people are vulnerable in a way that they don't realize. I think being emotionally vulnerable is extremely difficult and people can recognize it because you have to speak it out loud, right? Whereas physical vulnerability, I think, is less of a scary thing, if that makes sense, or less of a conscious thing. That's the word I'm looking for. As when people are put in a high intensity environment, and like say women that come into my gym for the first time and they are trying to do pull-ups in a way that they have never experienced before, that can be very, very scary. And as a coach, I could recognize that the energy that I bring to them and the humanity that I share with them helps them understand their own capability. Because capability was something that I always was obsessed with, my whole life for many reasons. And maybe that's a personality thing, maybe that's past experience thing. But I really enjoyed, especially working with women who walk into these gyms and they go, oh, well, I can't do that. They have these narratives in their head. They have this identity around incapability. Whereas you show them a few things, you look at them and you're like, well, of course it feels hard right now. You're moving in a way that's kind of making it more difficult. If we tweak this, I think you can definitely do it. And that was one way in which I could recognize immediately that I had something to contribute right there. I think the other way being that the more vulnerable I became with myself and the more I understood about myself and the way that I struggled, the more capacity I had to be there for other people and the larger skill set that I had to connect with them as an individual and support their own growth. It's been incredible, actually. The more comfortable I am with myself, the more love I can show, I think the more that people around me can feel it.
I'm glad you touched on that because I think during your own transformation, you've seen your own growth, which is unique and is incredible as you go through this this pathway towards finding where you want to be and push forward to where you would like to be. But throughout that, you come across different people in different environments. Do you feel like your relationships along the way have changed as you have changed?
Absolutely. Oh my God, James. This is like the biggest thing that has changed in my life was, when I started going to therapy and being along this kind of weird back and forth journey that I was on the past couple of years, because the last 6 years of my life, I only spent like maybe 5 or 6 months in one place at a time before I'd bounce to the next. It was Wyoming and then Panama, then Wyoming, then Chester, then Wyoming, then Chester, then Wyoming, then Scotland, stuff like that. And it was just so funny because I remember finishing up my undergrad degree, and after having these experiences, having this incredible transformation in the UK, and having to leave Chester twice, having it broken my heart the first time to leave, gone back for a second time, knowing that I would have to leave again, and be in a state where I had previously never felt connected to the people around me, that I really struggled to feel myself and to accept myself. I asked myself that question of like, what is useful about this time period that I have right now? If I move over to Scotland and I have not made any changes to the way that I engage with other people, I'm going to bring all that baggage with me and continue to deal with it. And so Wyoming, that last year, as I was really working my ass off to get over to the UK, became a time for me to lean into my friendships. That's what I decided. I now had the capability to recognize that the people around, and so I felt extremely uncomfortable doing it, but I was like, I have to understand how I can show up better as a friend and how I can learn to let people love me. And it was, I'll just tell a quick story about it. Actually, before I started therapy, there was a woman that her name was Kelly. She went to our 6 a.m. classes and my Sunday morning class at our CrossFit gym there. And her house was right around the corner from the gym. And I remember one of the first times I'd come back from the Chester in 2023 and I was first coaching. She invited me over after a Sunday morning class to have pancakes. And the way in which I used to respond to people was actually, I would always just say like, oh, they're just being nice. They don't actually want me there. They're lying. And so I'd make up some excuse and be like, oh, like, I've got work to do, that kind of thing, even if I had nothing on. I started therapy and I went through these processes of unpacking the narrative that I had around myself. And months later, I had the opportunity again. And Kelly, bless her persistence, she asked me over for pancakes. And I, after having that thought process of like, oh, if somebody invites me over to have pancakes, that probably means that they actually want me there. It's okay to trust that people mean what they say and that they care about you. And that friendship that I had with this woman, and she had an 8-year-old daughter, the friendship that I had with them, they became a family that I had not previously experienced. And they mean so much to me. Just the generosity. I started going over for coffee every Sunday because I took a leap and I leaned into that discomfort to try to learn to trust. And it was beautiful because across the growth of that relationship, across the growth of myself as a person and the ways in which I was trying to reconfigure how I related to those around me, I then had more love in my life than I had ever thought was possible. And the community that I had in Laramie, Wyoming, really taught me that. I had people who my car battery died and they showed up to replace it. They didn't make me pay for the battery. They just took care of it same day. And I had people who helped me move apartments. And I had people who provided me a space in their basement when I was stuck on housing before coming over to Scotland. And so I went from somebody who originally would never ask for help because I thought that I wasn't worth the help to just being supported all around. And I walked away from those experiences and I moved to Scotland knowing that when I had the capacity to do that for other people, I would. And I moved to Scotland and I started believing that people might find value in my friendship. And I had groups of girls start coming to my house for potlucks and I invited people over for coffee. And they were like little moments that add so much to my life that I never would have thought were possible before then. And it was incredible.
Your individual growth throughout this journey has allowed you to be in vulnerable moments. And it's that growth that's allowed you to overcome them and take ownership of, the emotion, the realism of everyone out there isn't attacking you, but trying to provide you an environment to continue your own growth. Psychology often tells us that human beings are searching for meaning, especially after a period of adversity, no different than your own. Some people believe difficult experiences happen for us. Others believe they simply happen to us. What meaning is something we create afterwards? Where do you stand on that in relation to meaning?
I think I always struggled with the concept that everything happened for a reason. Because as a kid, I think when I looked at the relationship that I had with my parents, and especially ways in which my mom treated me and responded to me, I had this inner frustration where I was like, things don't have to be this way. Things don't have to be the way that they are. And I think that's why I've ended up in a preventative form of healthcare and public health, right? Because in my mind, I like things done well. I think especially in regards to love, like I think so everybody has this capacity to be loving and there for other people, but maybe the ways that they treat themselves or the circumstances that they're in limit the ways that they're able to show it to other people. And so I just struggled. I struggled so hard to understand this whole like, oh, this is happening to me for a reason and it's going to make me a better person. Because I think equally, actually, in this past year, some experiences that I had, again, like some wounds getting reopened with my family after moving to Scotland, I had to learn to understand and appreciate the fact that I didn't have to respond this way. And I was reading this book about a girl who struggled with a similar family dynamic to what I had, and the substance abuse that came after that and the relationship abuse that she suffered and all of these different ways. And I had to have this in really intense appreciation for the ways that I responded to the circumstances I was in as a kid and the service that it has now become and what I do as a coach and what I'm working to do as a researcher and underneath the Functional Fitness Federation. However, though, I think instead of saying things happen for a reason, that same framework that I had, the questions that I asked myself as I've gone through my journey of what could be really helpful about this situation? Like, what is the opportunity that's presented in the circumstances that I'm in right now? I think in the past, I used to be really frustrated because of that fixation that I had on things don't have to be this way made me extremely agentic. Like I could do whatever I wanted because I knew things didn't have to be this way. So I'm going to reconfigure it and take advantage of whatever opportunities out there. But it also made me deny a lot of things and unaccepting of things that I couldn't change. And so recently I've now had to have the other end of the sentence, which is, yeah, things don't have to be the way that they are, but they are this way right now. And if I could look at that and say they are this way right now, and how can I use that? How can I alchemize this into something that can be of service to other people and help my own growth? That has been incredibly I think just magnified the work that I've been able to do and intensified the transformation that I've had as a person.
Talk a lot about what you've overcome, and the purpose behind that is quite telling because there's a lot of little things that combine together to be a massive hurdle for you to overcome. And the use of CBT, therapies involved in the CrossFit community are helping your transformation as you go forward. But did purpose emerge naturally for you through your healing journey, or did you find it you had to actively search for it?
That's such a good question. It's interesting because there were a lot of things that happened in my life that I couldn't have planned for. That did seem to emerge and be placed in front of me, but there were also ways in which I worked really hard to make it happen. And it reminds me a lot of that quote. I don't know who to attribute it to, but they talk about how luck is the intersection between opportunity and hard work to get there. Opportunity and perseverance, however you want to frame that. And part of the reason that I actually went on all the adventures that I did in my undergrad degree and I went to the rainforest and did these things was because I always felt this desire to contribute. I wanted to be of service to somebody. It felt really important to me that whatever work that I did made the world around me better. I think I would have struggled to have a job where I was going in day in, day out and not knowing why. And so in that way, that seemed to be like a facet of my personality or my character where I wanted to, service was a big value that I had. But on the flip side of that, I feel extremely lucky because I could not have planned the luck that I had to be in the scenario that I'm in right now, because the career that I am now starting and working towards feels like an intersection of many different facets of my life that just emerged. So going from having this emotional transformation as an individual through CrossFit, having in the past used exercise and nutrition as a controlling mechanism for myself, and then going to a new country, having those experiences there intersect with the research skills that I was developing, but at the same time also giving me the perfect path forward to being back in the country that I wanted to be in. You know, like I could not have planned it that doing a PhD could help me support the charities in the ways that I saw they needed, because they're all working towards helping people on their own. And hopefully my research can help give them kind of a guide as to like, this is what works well about what you do. And this is how we can help support people in the best way. So it's contributing to the groups of people that changed my life so much, but then also helping me because on a student visa, I can be back in the UK and I can be in my new home, have this life that I didn't even know was possible. And I picked Edinburgh because it felt like a city with the characteristics that I think would suit me best. And somehow landed in the university with the first ever CrossFit gym affiliated underneath the university system. That I could not have planned for. And there have been so many different opportunities presented to me that I think I worked really hard in order to have the skill set and the drive to fulfill it and the capability to enact them while just feeling incredibly lucky and grateful for the things that I couldn't have planned for.
Thank you for sharing that. And as I said earlier on, it's an incredible journey. And I'm sure many people listening to this will resonate with a lot of things you've said in their own individual ways of what they're overcoming, living with, or learning about themselves as they continue to relive a lot of issues in their life that they wish to overcome. And listen to this hopefully will help them. One thing I learned on my own recovery with PTSD is the use of movement, specifically CrossFit. And I use that within my own PhD thesis to provide insight for many others who are searching for a mechanism to use themselves. CrossFit, what I found, helped me to regain my own identity, something I struggled with for a long time. It gave me my self-confidence, autonomy, and a level of self-control, all through the exercise, but also through the community. Transformation is rarely maintained through one dynamic movement. It's usually supported by repeated practice, and we touched on that earlier on. You could start thinking you're going to do something, and then finish it thinking, well, how did I do that? How did I do the double unders? I didn't even have a skipping rope. How did that work? What habits or practices have you found helpful for yourself, especially as you continue to grow rather than slipping back into survival mode?
Yeah, I think something that is underrated, both as a tool for coaches, but also for personal growth is play, like being really curious about yourself from a movement and a physical standpoint, but then also a mental, emotional standpoint as well. It was really interesting because as a coach, the way that I was trained, and especially being a personal trainer in a commercial style gym setting, before becoming a CrossFit coach, I was taught to have regiments and have guidelines and develop programs for people and give them a set program that they would follow. And yet I found the complete opposite thing helpful for myself, where I would turn up at a CrossFit gym and I would play around with these movements, and especially with gymnastics, where you're learning how to coordinate your body and use your momentum and the force and timing and all these things in order to accomplish a certain skill. And the more that I tried to hold myself to a strict regimen, the more I didn't want to do it, and I wasn't having fun. And I actually learned a lot less and wasn't growing very fast. Whereas having this practice of play, of just enjoying it, taught me a lot about how it feels to be in my body and how to direct my muscles at the right time in order to try to do certain things. And I found a lot of growth by just sitting with myself. And then equally, when I was doing workouts, asking myself questions of like, how does this feel? And does it feel efficient? Like, am I able to apply force in the way that I want to be applying force? But am I also enjoying it? Like, how is my heart rate doing? Stuff like that. And it's a great way, I think, to kind of create that mind-body connection that everybody talks about right now. But then equally out in the world around me, it translates into this sense of play and not this idea that I have to do everything perfectly. The way that I used to approach things, like I have to show up in the best way possible in order to achieve something. Whereas now I can kind of sit there and be like, okay, how does it feel in my life to be forcing myself to work 9 hours a day? Like, am I getting the outcomes that I want? Is this helpful for my research? How do I feel as a person? Am I able to show up for myself right now? Yeah.
Movement and physical activity are big parts of your day, be it what you do as a job, but also part of your own, duty of care, well-being on your own self. But what roles do reflection, rest, relationships, boundaries, and also self-care play in your life to stop you slipping back to your old ways?
It plays such a massive role in my ability to show up as the person that I want to be. And something that I think I underestimated as in this role, taking on a PhD. Every time I would tell somebody that I was going to do a PhD, they'd give me this look of horror, like, "Oh God, that sounds awful," which I'm sure you can relate to. And I'd always get these questions of like, how do you have the time to coach while you're doing that? And like stuff like that. And it's been really interesting because what I love about it is, especially with my project, because I just designed what I do. I decided to pursue this. Nobody gave me this research. I also get to be in control of what I think is valuable and what's contributing to the work that I do. Something that I struggled with when I was younger, talking about this idea of using work as a way to supplement a sense of self-worth. And I find myself slipping back into this in my worst moments where I feel that I have to be working. Everything is fixated around the value that I provide as a researcher or in the job position that I'm doing. And so as I've gone about this PhD research, but then also talking about the ways that I've grown as a coach and how I've realized that the way that I show up as a human being is more important half the time than the technical prowess that I give my clients. Making sure that I get enough sleep and that I am moving and that I am still in touch with why I care so much about the things that I do and the people around me is actually what facilitates the highest quality work that I do. And so I feel very lucky in the fact that the work that I do has come from a lot of personal meaning, and that I also recognize that the output, the value that I'm creating is tied to the ways in which I take care of myself and take care of other people. I don't know if it's like that for everybody, depending on what kind of job you're working and the role that you provide, but it's definitely been a new mental framework for me and something I have to constantly remind myself. Yeah.
We live in a culture that celebrates visible achievement on social media, where we look at titles, income, followers, qualification, and public success, really. But inner transformation is often very difficult to measure. So how do we know when we are genuinely growing rather than simply becoming more successful?
What became really important to me the past couple of years while I was trying to really make sure that I sat with myself and reworked the ways that I engaged with other people was I also had to accept that being nice to myself was the only way to keep myself going. Because if you never give yourself a pat on the back or the recognition to say like, oh, in the past when somebody used to invite you out to a movie or out for a coffee, you'd get really scared and run away or make an excuse or say you have to work, right? And to recognize that now I could actually engage and say like, I want to be with this person and I feel like that I can be of value to them. I have to allow myself to recognize that because otherwise the narrative continues. I could be acting differently. And if I don't recognize it, then I never consciously discover the way that in which I'm growing, but I also lose the opportunity to reinforce the growth that's already happening. So it feels to me, in my experiences, that making sure to have a little bit of gratitude for the ways in which I'm showing up for myself and showing up for other people, and take moments to slow down, recognize, be very introspective about how I am moment to moment, that not only allows me to recognize that I'm growing, but also facilitates continual growth. I think growth begets more growth. I think a lot of us, just as human beings, we want to grow. I think something that I've really noticed working as a coach, but then also in the research space, is that there seems to be this narrative that people think that if they weren't whipping themselves to do something, they would just stay stagnant and they'd be a couch potato and they'd eat really junky food. But what I've learned through my research and the roles that I've had is when people are really, really in touch with themselves and staying in tune to the things that they care about, they have principles and values to come back to. People want growth. I think they thirst for it. They'll always go back to it if they just give themselves a break and the chance to recognize how they're doing.
There may be someone listening today to this podcast who feels trapped by fear, anxiety, self-doubt, or a painful chapter in their own life that they keep continuing reliving. They may understand that change is necessary, but they cannot yet imagine what transformation looks like. What would you want the person to understand about transformation that they may not yet realize themselves?
A trap that I think I fell into myself was this black and white thinking of, if there was a way in which I wanted to be different, I had to be completely the opposite, and I had to go above and beyond, and I had to fix everything all at once. And it was so difficult for me to admit this to myself because, talking about the fact that I really struggled to accept the ways in which things were, because I always believed that they could be different. It was hard for me to meet myself where I was, especially the things that I was trapped in shame around. Like, I was to come up with an example, something that I had to really face going through therapy after leaving my parents' house was the fact that I lied a lot. And it was always to give myself a little bit of credit. It was with good intentions. It was either wanting to make other people feel better or to minimize harm or something like that. But I just held so much shame about the ways in which I was dishonest, either about who I was or just little white lies in my day-to-day life. And instead of telling myself, oh, you shouldn't lie at all, right? You have to be honest at all times and flip a complete 180. Transformation was facilitated by meeting myself where I was and recognizing, okay, you lied in that situation. What contributed to you lying? Were you scared? Does it make sense that you were scared? Again, coming back to that idea of being curious, like being in wonder about yourself and what's contributing to the decisions that you're making so that you can become more conscious. That conscientiousness and being more in touch with myself and more in touch with the things that I care about. Because not only could I meet myself in that way, but I could also then recognize, like, you're using shame as a way to stop yourself from lying because you care about being honest. What if you were just honest? What if you took a risk? Like, then it becomes this experimentation. Transformation to me all just came from experimentation and curiosity about myself rather than shame. Because that's to me what like flipping that extreme really felt like, was I was always trying to control the way in which I was rather than meeting myself.
So what would you tell people who have tried to make change, to move forward, but they've hit that barrier and failed? What would be your message to those?
Be really curious about themselves. Like, what is contributing to you not changing? What is the way in which the way that you're showing up right now, how is that helpful for you? Is that why you haven't changed? And if you really care about being differently, why? Why do you care about being different? Because I think the more people shame themselves by saying you have to be different, but not really being in touch with how or what or why, it's hard to make those steps forward without having a real reason besides just hating yourself.
If you could leave listeners with one message about living a life of significance rather than simply surviving, what would it be? And how could they start that step today?
Leading a life of significance, I think, comes from recognizing what you value, the opportunities in front of you, and the way in which you want to see the world be. Like I said, I feel extremely lucky that I am so young, and yet I feel that I have come across something in which my character and my skill set intersects with the opportunities that I see in front of me and the service in which I feel I can provide to the world and to the communities that made a big difference in my life. The topic of today has been, and of your podcast in general, is transformation. The value that I have been able to bring other people came from really being, and any experience of significance within somebody's life, I think, can be alchemized into a significance that they can bring to other people. Yeah, I feel just constantly in awe of the fact that not only did the community that I found through CrossFit change my life and give me the opportunity to recognize that I can be loved and that I can be cared for and that I'm worth value, but that they also inspired this work that is so meaningful to me, and that the things that are meaningful to me might actually be incredibly meaningful and significant to other people. It's just this compounding cycle of reinforcement. The ways in which I help myself are the ways in which I help other people. The ways in which I love myself are also the ways in which I am best able to love the people around me.
You mentioned there about the work that you're going on to do for your PhD. Could you, just for the listeners today, give an insight about what CrossFit is, or functional fitness, and the work that you would like your PhD to help others with?
Yeah, absolutely. CrossFit is unique to me because not only has it taken fitness to a new level, or like created a standard and a methodology for pursuing health, but also introduced a culture in which people can intimately connected to themselves, but also connected to others. And this is why when I talk about CrossFit in my research, and I use the term community-based functional fitness as a way to be inclusive of groups that use the same methodology, but may not be officially affiliated underneath the CrossFit brand, because it is a corporate organization. The two main components that I talk about in my research that contribute to the culture that you experience in a CrossFit environment would be the community and the fitness methodology. And the characteristics of each come together and emerge into this culture that you can find held between the charities that I work in and the gyms around the world that practice the same methodology. And I remember it's actually been really funny kind of going into the world of academia, because trying to describe to people that I actually think that this is different. This is a system of health and support rather than just a sport or a fitness activity has been really difficult. And it's been helpful that a lot of the experiences that I've had in my own life, growing up in a religious environment, but then also traveling internationally and working internationally, has taught me so much about culture and the way that cultural values impact people's behavior and the way that they show up for other people. The intensity and the scalability and the design of the fitness methodology in general allows it to be accessible for the people that want to engage. There's that classic saying of like, it's for anyone, but not for everyone, right? And to me, that is the definition of what a culture is like, if you buy into it, if you buy into these values, you can be a part, and that contributes to the intense bonding that you experience through high intensity workouts. And I find it so unique for that reason. I've kind of compared it before when I talk to my supervisors. The analogy that I kind of came up with was it's the difference between a book club and a Bible study, where for a book club, you're coming together because you enjoy the pastime of reading a book. Like, you enjoy reading books as a hobby and you share that with other people. That's great. A Bible study is something that's centered around your values. And in that context, it's a religious context. It's talking about morality and the way that you feel life should be lived. And then if I was to expand on that, CrossFit and a sport. People are on a soccer team and they share that together, and it's really fun. And soccer is fantastic, or football, I should really start translating, shouldn't I? They all come together for the love of the sport, and they play those games because they want to win a game, which is awesome. And it's really fun. And I think sports can do a lot for people. The unique contribution that I see in CrossFit is that it's tied to this pursuit of health, this cultural movement towards progress and exploring who you are as a person and sharing that in community.
Thank you for sharing that. CrossFit can provide so many outcomes for people, being able-bodied or not. And it's the exercise, it's the environment and the community. It's a dynamic approach, and everyone can get something from it. You talked a lot about today about your own journey of healing. You've overcome a lot of challenges along the way. If you wouldn't mind, just finish off this sentence for me. Transformation begins the moment we
accept our current pain. Yeah. I think what killed me the most about the environment that I grew up in was the numbing that we all experienced, or the ways in which we wouldn't look. We wouldn't open the drawer, because it felt too scary. And we were afraid of the pain that comes with accepting that the dynamic that we had as a family, the ways in which we treated ourselves or treated the people around us, it was too painful to look at. I think that's the best way to stay stuck. If you don't acknowledge it, and allowing yourself to feel that is what allows you to recognize how beautiful life is too, as well. I think the joy that I feel as a person, and I really appreciated your compliment earlier, actually, about the energy you could feel through, even though we're through a screen right now. It means a lot to me because I think the joy that I am able to feel now in my daily life, it came from all the work that I did in getting over to this country and the accomplishments that I've had and the ways that I love my job and the work that I do and the people around me. That joy and that transformation was only accessible because I could feel the pain and the grief that I needed to look at when I was younger.
Thank you very much for sharing that. A big part of this podcast is meeting like-minded people like yourself and others, people who've got lived experience, expertise, or just got a message to share. And I'm hoping anybody who watches this podcast or listens to it will resonate with everything that you've said and learn from the experience. I'm very honoured that we got to meet and we've been able to get together through this means and provide an enjoyable but also an enlightening conversation for people to listen to. So Summer, thank you for sharing your experiences and insights so openly and so emotionally today. Today's conversation reminds us that transformation is not simply about escaping a difficult chapter. It's about deciding what we will carry forward, what we will release, and how the person we are becoming might positively influence the world around us. You can find more episodes like today of trauma, training and transformation, exploring how movement heals the mind on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Apple Music, or wherever you find your podcast. You can also watch the video on my YouTube channel, James Alder 003. Please subscribe, follow the podcast, and share this episode with someone who may need to hear it. The most powerful transformation is not measured by how far we move from our past, but by how far and how deeply our healing changes the way we show up for others and for ourselves. So until next time, every journey towards healing begins the same way. Not a giant leap forward, but with the courage to take one more step, to keep moving and keep growing. Thank you for listening, and hope to see you on the next one.